Welcome to the G5 Hive and our next installment of our Worker Bee series, where we deep dive into G5 college football landscape with the folks that know the teams the best. If you're watching on YouTube, please hit that like and subscribe button. And if you're listening to us in podcast form, please give us a 5-star rate and review. Today, we will be taking a look at the Toledo Rockets, who finished 11-3 and have won back-to-back MAC West titles. They wrapped up their 2024 spring practice, their spring game on April 6th. Please welcome to the show Kyle Rowland, the college sports reporter and golf writer for Toledo Blade. He can be found on X at Kyle Rowland. Welcome, Kyle.
Hey guys, how you doing? That was a big time intro. I liked it.
Thanks.
Hopefully you're ready to run through a wall after watching some of those highlights.
Heard that song many times.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of what led you into sports reporting and in particular covering Toledo athletics?
Yeah, growing up, always wanted to work at a newspaper, not necessarily sports writing, but writing in some form. I've worked at the Blade now for 9 years. Did news writing some, and then I've been in sports since 2016. Actually, previously covered Michigan and Ohio State. Moved over to Toledo during the pandemic and have done it ever since. I've enjoyed it. I always tell people that, having I covered Indiana and Purdue too. I've covered like half the Big Ten, and really enjoyed it. But the access is just a total different level at a place like Toledo. And I always tell people, you hear reporters complain about not being able to do anything these days or whatever. Like covering Toledo, I'm almost like in the golden age of journalism again. I get to talk to these coaches all the time. I talk to the players. I hang out in their office, and I kind of have total access. So it's really nice.
That's awesome.
Toledo's offense was really rolling last season. They ranked 39th in total offense, averaging just under 420 yards per game, 69th in passing at 220, and 16th in rushing offense, averaging almost 200 yards a game. They did put up 32.3 points per game, which was good for 30th in the country. Let's get to the position where it all starts on offense and also happens to be one where there's going to be a new starter in 2024, and that is the quarterback. So last year's starter, DeQuan Finn, has moved on to Baylor. They do return last year's top backup and starter, and he was starter in the Barstool Sports Arizona Bowl, and that is Tucker Gleason. How did that quarterback room look and shake out during the spring?
Yeah, it's certainly Tucker Gleason's job to lose. I wouldn't necessarily call it like a full-fledged competition, but it was kind of a situation where they're not going to name Tucker the starter, right now. They're going to just let it play out. But he's going to be the guy, barring some catastrophic injury or something. Even the guy who's going to be the backup is probably going to be John Allen Richter. He talked after the spring on how they know Tucker's the guy pretty much. I think DeQuan Finn was a fascinating character in the sense of, I thought he was very overrated nationally. National reporters kind of thought he was just this unbelievable player. Locally, the fan base kind of thought he was way overrated. I think they were both wrong. I think if you meet in the middle, that's kind of where you were. I think DeQuan Finn was really good. The record book kind of speaks for itself or whatever. But certainly last year it helped. He had a great offensive line. It helped that he had Penny Boone. They had a good receiving core. So I don't think there's going to be some massive drop-off at the quarterback position. I think Tucker Gleason has proven himself to be a very solid quarterback. 2 seasons ago, he came in and saved Toledo at Eastern Michigan in a must-win game when DeQuan Finn was injured. Last year, he came in, saved Toledo against Western Michigan when they were losing by, I think, 17 points. So he's been put in high stress, high pressure situations, and he's succeeded. He wasn't great in the bowl game, but I thought he was good. He had the month of practice kind of knowing he was going to be the number one guy. Thought he looked pretty good in the spring. I think the biggest thing with him is he he has a little bit of, he's got moxie. He's got kind of an it factor. He's a supremely confident guy. He's just a vocal, like you can read his body language. I don't like Daquan was very quiet. I mean, he's one of the quietest quarterbacks, literally, like after post game when you talk to him. I mean, you could almost like barely hear him because he spoke so softly. I think just the whole personality of Tucker Gleason is going to serve the offense very well this year. I think he's an underrated runner as well. He's not in the Daquan Finn mold where he's just going to like have 100 yards rushing and just blow by an entire defense, but he knows how to pick his spots, and he can pick up some big, first downs, extend some drives.
Yeah, that's interesting. You talk about that because Luke and I have had a conversation about Gleason and Finn, and like I don't know. I think like what I thought maybe Finn's statistics was, especially on the rushing department. Like in my mind, I thought they were way higher than they actually were, and we both kind of felt that Gleason could come close, in terms of statistics wise, kind of producing what Daquan Finn has over the last couple of years. You mentioned a couple of the younger guys, and you talked about sophomore John Allen Richter. Can you tell us more about him? And then you have a pair of redshirt freshmen and R.J. Johnson III and Jake DeHaan, and then true freshman early enrollee Caleb Osborne. Like he's someone that I feel like folks, if they're not, they should be kind of excited for. He looked great in high school. Can you tell us a little bit about them and how they looked in the spring?
Yeah, I'll start with Osborne. He got injured in his final college game, so he was out of the spring. So didn't get to see him, but yes, I mean they're very excited about him. Great high school player. A little bit of that Daquan Finn mold. I think he's more polished passer entering college than Finn was, but he's definitely someone they're excited about, and perhaps is the quarterback of the future. Down the road in a couple of years. Richter is a guy who you've just heard about him a lot since he got on campus. Like, man, like wait till you see this Richter guy, wait in a few years for this guy. I mean, he got some feelers from SEC programs during his recruiting. I think it might've been South Carolina. I don't want to speak out of turn, but someone wanted him, I think, to gray shirt. I think he opted not to do that, obviously. But I mean, he's from Georgia, was a really good high school quarterback. I mean, he's accurate. He throws hard. He's I don't know. He's kind of like that prototype guy you want behind center. I think he's got a promising future. He had a little bit of a poor spring game, partially because of the backup center had trouble snapping him the ball. So kind of, had his rhythm off, which was unfortunate. He was pretty frustrated by that, I know. But he's a guy everyone from coaches, receivers, linemen, anyone you talk to has great things to say about him. And then another Georgian is behind him, R.J. Johnson. You talk about high school stats. This guy really lit it up. I mean, he's one of the most prolific Georgia high school quarterbacks of all time. And that list of players he's against is kind of like a who's who of quarterbacks. At some point, someone's going to be the odd man out because they've got so many talented quarterbacks. And in this era of the portal, there's less patience, obviously, when you can go somewhere and play right away. But RJ is a very athletic guy, great thrower. But I mean, I think he's kind of an underrated guy who can use his legs. But I think the quarterback position in the future, they've got enough bodies there that they're going to be good. And at some point this season, I feel like someone other than Tucker Gleason will be playing quarterback, just because this day and age, it seems like quarterbacks get injured a lot. I mean, yeah. Toledo's dealt with that a lot the last, 5, 6, 7 years. And Tucker Gleason is big and strong, and he's super tough. There's no doubt about it. This guy is really tough. But I don't know. Chances are at some point he's going to have to come out of a game or maybe even miss a game.
All right. If you had to pick one of those QBs that you mentioned as a future, because you talked about hey, there's this tough room here and somebody might transfer out, but if you had to pick somebody right now, who do you think the quarterback of the future would be, and what kind of skill set do you think they bring to that table?
I mean, I would say Richter, just because even though he's not like super experienced, he's like the most experienced of the bunch. I mean, I fully expect him to be the backup this season. And like I say, I mean, you have just heard so much about him that I'd be surprised if he kind of isn't the guy at some point. And I mean, I think he's a traditional quarterback. Not a huge runner. I don't think that'd be a big part. I mean, they'd be a very, pass first offense with him behind center.
All right. So moving on to the running game, and they suffer another big loss. I mean, you kind of alluded to it earlier, but you lose star Penny Boone, who is now back in the transfer portal after not sure what happened there at Louisville, but they do return Jaquiz Stewart and Willie Shaw III, among others. How did that running back room shape up this spring?
Yeah, I mean, there were some injuries in it, so some guys you didn't even see. I mean, Connor Wollensack, who was a local kid, freshman last year, they're high on him. I mean, he's just a great kid. He's smart. He's a workhorse. He was out with an injury in the spring. Mike Drennan missed part of the spring because of an injury. Another guy, I think maybe the most underrated guy who could kind of flash at times this season. But Stewart, I think, is definitely the guy here. I mean, he's super fast. I mean, I think he won the state championship in Florida track as a senior, which, I mean, obviously there's a lot of fast guys in Florida. I think that was the 100 as well. So, I mean, he's been around. He's not like necessarily an every down back guy. I mean, I think this will be a by committee approach they take this season. And I think Willie Shaw probably is the second guy there. He was someone when he came out of high school, talking to recruiting guys in the Chicagoland area. I mean, they really thought he was kind of a Big Ten caliber guy that was under the radar, that Toledo did a good job of getting, like a Michigan State or a Purdue type of guy. And I mean, Toledo's had a lot of success, especially under Jason Candle, of like identifying guys who maybe aren't as heralded and then developing them into, very productive players in their careers. And I think Willie Shaw could maybe be that next guy at running back who really makes a name for himself.
And then you talked about Woldensack being out this spring, but what kind of role do you think we might be able to see him here in 2024?
Yeah, I mean, limited. Yeah. I mean, I guess limited, but he obviously didn't have a great per yard or per rush, whatever, average last year. But he's just a huge, strong guy. He's a forceful runner, keeps the legs moving. I mean, he was an unbelievable high school player. I covered several of his games. He went to Perrysburg, which is a big school in Ohio, Division I. And I mean, every time he touched the ball, he made a difference. He was a finalist for Mr. Football in the state of Ohio. He's just someone you want on your team, just natural leadership ability, kind of a charismatic guy that players want to follow. He's kind of a coach's dream, really coachable player as well. So, I mean, I think he would be limited, but I think he can definitely, be positive influence for Toledo's offense.
Moving over to the receivers, and kind of unlike the rest of the offense, they don't really lose anyone. They return everyone in terms of top receivers and their tight ends. Juwan Newton, Junior Vandeross, Larry Stevens, as well as tight end Anthony Torres. How did that wide receiver group look this spring?
I think wide receiver is a deep position for Toledo. A lot of bodies. It's kind of about who's going to take the next step. Last year, it was Junior Vandeross. You've got Thomas Zyros. He's a local guy. Zamarian Lang is an interesting one. He's a true freshman, was actually one time a South Carolina commit. They were thrilled on signing day when they were able to get him. Eric Holly is someone who last year they thought maybe would take the step, but it just didn't happen. Jaden Dotton is a transfer from Penn State. He had his moments last year. I think he'll be a guy that is definitely a part of the offense this season, and I expect him to have a pretty decent year. Terrell Crosby, an Iowa State transfer. He had a good spring, someone that you heard a lot about. And then Tashi Braceful is a potential impact freshman who enrolled early and got some recognition in the spring as well.
Do you think any of those new guys are kind of crack, or anybody has a chance to kind of crack the starting lineup? Or they're just going to be more kind of in the rotation.
I mean, I guess more so rotation. I mean, of that group, I mean, I would say Crosby and Dotton at the end of the year will probably kind of have the best stats of that group. But I don't know. It's just wide receivers so fickle, I think. I mean, some of it has to do, I mean, there's certainly luck involved, but just, I mean, some of it can be the connection with the quarterback. You know, if you have a good game early, like the confidence just kind of grows. So I don't know. I think wide receiver is always interesting and hard to predict because of, you know, some of those outside factors.
Last season, tight end Anthony Torres seemed to really come on strong kind of as the season went along and progressed. How did he look in the spring, and what do you think we can expect from him in 2024?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is the guy for Toledo. I mean, he was really good the second half of the season. I was at the NFL Combine covering Quinyon Mitchell, and there were people there, you know, talking about Torres being a draft pick, you know, thought maybe he could have even come out this year. And I was just kind of like, whoa, didn't like realize that. But I mean, he's 6'6", 6'7", you know, sure-handed guy. I mean, he's he's what you want in a modern tight end for sure. I mean, athletic, fast, agile. He's a smart player. He can block too, which is something that obviously bodes
super
well.
Important for the NFL.
Yeah, exactly. But the new tight ends coach at Toledo, Derek Sage, he came from UCLA, and he's kind of a Chip Kelly disciple. But he had some really good tight ends at UCLA, and he was like, oh yeah, like immediately I thought this guy could have played for UCLA and he would have fit in totally fine. So, I mean, I think he's a guy they need to try to get the ball to a lot this season. I mean, he's a great safety valve. I think that it would kind of stretch the offense as well. I mean, if you get a tight end involved, it's just someone else the defense has to worry about. And there's also good guys behind him at that position. I mean, he was not even going to be the starter last season, but Lenny Cool had a season-ending injury in the fall camp. So, I mean, he's a guy who is from Germany, you know, went to high school over here. You know, Toledo had really, really high hopes for him last season. And then a young guy, CC Ezram, is from Dublin, Ohio, down by Columbus. And I mean, if you want to watch his high school film after we get off this, I mean, the guy is unbelievable. So tight end's a deep position. I mean, Torres obviously is going to get most of those snaps this year, I would expect. And I really think he could be a guy who maybe gets some national recognition this season.
And you might need some of those tight ends to do a little blocking because the offensive line takes a pretty big hit this year, losing all 5 starters and their top backup. What did Toledo do this offseason to shore up that offensive line, and how did that unit look this spring?
Yeah, I mean, offensive line, there's no doubt. I mean, games are won and lost there. Defensive line as well. We all know the cliche, you know, games are won and lost in the trenches. And last year for Toledo, I mean, I think that was very true. I mean, an unbelievable line. I think the best in the MAC. Some people maybe would argue Miami, Ohio. But, I mean, it was elite level. I mean, you look at their running stats. They were, I think, top 10 nationally in running the ball. But when you lose every single player from that, I mean, that is asking a lot to replace them. So Toledo did some portal hunting in the offseason. They got Jacob James from Ohio State, Jackson Cannon from Mississippi State, Alan Jones from Prairie View, Maddox Marcotte was a JUCO transfer. They have Ethan Spott, Garrett Schweber, and Rod Orr, who was a Florida State transfer last year, who were already, you know, on the team coming back. I mean, it's a lot. I mean, I know Jacob James from Ohio State, you know, they were pretty pleased with this year. Some of the returning guys already on the team, I think will be on that line. And it's not just finding 5 good guys. I mean, you have to have depth there as well. I mean, you're going to have injuries. I mean, guys get tired during games, all that kind of stuff. I mean, you have to have, you know, 6, 7 fairly reliable bodies. And I mean, they're all going to be blocking behind a new quarterback, a new starting running back, I guess you could say. I mean, it's a very difficult thing. And I mean, I think all the other spots, even though quarterback and running back have new guys, I mean, I think they're good enough. Like Toledo could still win the MAC with those guys, but I mean, it all comes down to the O-line, in my opinion. I mean, you can't have a guy running for life. You can't have a running back that has no holes to get through. I mean, it obviously all starts with the offensive line.
All right, we've talked about a lot of different players, a lot of newcomers this year. If you had to pick one offensive player to have a breakout type season in 2024, who would that be?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I tend to go maybe with one of the wide receivers. I'm going to say Crosby from Iowa State, but I thought Mike Drennan, a running back who played sparingly last year, but did some stuff. I could see him maybe breaking out and being a guy that gets some serious playing time this season. But I don't know. The way Toledo's offense is, I tend to go to that wide receiver position, and I bet someone really stands out from there.
Moving over to the defensive side of the ball, the unit was pretty impressive in 2023, finishing 27th in total defense, giving up 331.8 yards per game, which ranked 16th in passing defense, giving up 183 yards per game, and 16th in sacks per game, getting 2.79 sacks a game. Along the defensive line, they do lose Judge Culpepper, but they do return just about everybody else. How did they look this spring?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good unit. They always seem to play pretty well. Franco Cam, their coach, came in last year. I think he's just a super energetic guy. He's got NFL experience. He was a great college player as well, and they really like him. I think he's good, but I think Darius Alexander is the guy who will become, the quote unquote household name on that line this year. He was good last year. I thought he'd be a little better, but I thought he was pretty solid. They got Kayvon Butler, DeAndre Reagan, Jerry Peters, Deshaun Holt, Deshaun Carter, Travian Ford. They have a lot of bodies. I think it's a deep unit. That's almost the unit that seems like recession proof on Toledo. I mean, no matter what, every year even last season, I mean, they lost, I'm drawing a blank now, Mr. Irrelevant. Oh my goodness. I forget his name. Got drafted by the Rams. Lost some
Deshaun Johnson?
Yeah, Deshaun Johnson. Jeez. And Jamal Hines and some guys who just were incredibly productive. And I mean, I didn't think there was any dramatic fall off or anything. I mean, they're always going to have a pretty good, bodies and productive guys at that unit. So I don't think it's a huge issue. I would expect D-line to be, pretty serviceable this season.
Moving over to the linebackers, they do lose leading tackler Dallas Skint, but do return Daniel Bolden, among others. Kind of how did that group look this spring, and did kind of anyone step up to take on the role vacated by Dallas Skint?
I mean, I think this is the shakiest unit on the team. I mean, Gant was just really, really good. Obviously, tons of tackles. He was just Mr. Reliable, I think. You always kind of knew what you were going to get with him. He was going to play well. He was a great leader as well, good presence in the locker room. Jackson Barrow will be someone. You heard a little bit about him a couple years ago. Not as much last year, was injured. Chris D'Apollonia is a sophomore, or he might actually be a redshirt. No, he's a sophomore because he played more than 4 games last season. He's kind of the next great linebacker at Toledo, in my opinion. I mean, he was a really good special teams player last season, made some plays in the spring game as well. Someone to kind of maybe put an asterisk next to his name and pay attention to him this season. Malachi Davis is a guy who was scout team player of the year several times last year. Those guys seem to pan out, it seems like, when you do some things as a young guy when, there's not a whole lot of recognition, but you come to practice every day and do well. I think he kind of bodes well for the future. But Bolden, I mean, it's big that he's back. I mean, he's been around forever, suffered, multiple season-ending injuries and came back and was still really good last year. So he's going to lead that unit, and he's just a great overall presence for the defense.
Is there anything you can tell us about West Virginia transfer Lance Dixon and maybe kind of how he might fit into this offense and into this defense in 2024?
Yeah, great question. I mean, that was a bad oversight by me. I should have mentioned him. I think he's going to be a guy who he's got a chance to be really good. He came a little late in the process. We're just, getting his feet and everything during spring practice, but the coaches are very excited about him. Teammates are excited about him. Obviously was a very heralded recruit, back in the day. I think he definitely is going to step in and maybe be a starter from day one.
So in terms of returning production and starters, the defensive backfield seems to take a pretty big hit. They lose safeties Nate Bauer, Zachary Ford, and cornerbacks Chris McDonald's and RJ Delancey III, and future NFL first-round cornerback, we all assume, Quinion Mitchell. They do return safeties MACtion Hook and Emmanuel McNeil. They bring in cornerback Jadarius Perkins from Florida. What can you tell us about this new look defensive backfield?
Yeah, I mean, my goodness, could you lose any more production than that? It's pretty startling, I think. Safety will be okay, though. I mean, MACtion Hook is really good. I mean, a surefire all-MAC guy. He'll probably be a draft pick next year. And then Emmanuel McNeil Warren, I mean, he really, really showed out last year, made a freshman All-America team, I believe. So I'm not super worried about that area, but cornerback, I mean, you lose a first-round draft pick. You lose McDonald, who is a fringe, 7th round undrafted free agent guy. And then Delancey didn't even start. And a lot of people thought he should have been all MAC last year. So, I mean, it's just an embarrassment of riches at quarterback last year for Toledo. But one thing they have on their side is Corey Parker, the cornerbacks coach, who's just unbelievable. Just oozes charisma. I'll actually have a story on him this week because not only does he have Quinion Mitchell getting drafted, but he's got 3 of his former high school players are going to be drafted this week. He was the head coach at River Rouge at Michigan, built them into a huge powerhouse program. So he is just a guy you trust. But then, I mean, Braden Alls is a local kid from Toledo, went to Central Catholic, which is a great, high school in the state. They won a lot of state titles. He's the next great Toledo cornerback, in my opinion. I think he's going to do great things. Perkins, you mentioned, transfer from Florida. They like him. That's another transfer from Youngstown State, Zeke Blake, who you hear his name an awful lot that's mentioned. Nasir Bowers, Andre Fuller are guys that were here last year, played some. I think they'll, play some again this season. But as much as they lost, I still think that's going to be kind of a cornerstone of the defense. Are they going to be as good? I mean, it's hard to be as good when you have like a top 15, top 20 draft pick that you're losing. But I don't think there's going to be like some crazy drop off. I expect them to have one of the best pass defenses in the MAC again this season.
If you had to pick only one defensive player to kind of have their breakout in 2024, who would that be?
Yeah, Braden Alls, no doubt. I think he's going to go from someone who played sparingly and was kind of a special teams guy to being all MAC. I mean, he was just so good in high school. He came from a great program. You just kind of see the progression that he's made this spring. They've made a point to kind of, illustrate that he's the kind of the next guy in line. And I really expect big things from him.
Now that the spring practice is over, which position group do you feel is the most concerning? Before you talked about offensive line and linebackers, if you had to pick one between the two, which would it be?
Yeah, I mean, That's a good question. I mean, I'm more concerned at linebacker just because I don't know. I don't know if they have like the bodies and the depth necessarily. Whereas at O-line, I mean, I have faith that they're gonna find guys. I still think they might add a lineman via the portal too, before the season even. I mean, just the line's just so important to everything, as I mentioned before. So it's a tough call. I'll just say offensive line.
So do you think, I mean, you mentioned kind of the transfer portal. We're recording this in the middle of the transfer window here. Do you think they also try to look at running backs, or are they always kind of shopping, or is there any in particular thing that they're looking for?
Yeah, I mean, I would say I wouldn't be stunned if they added a running back. I mean, Jason Candle, I mean, his transfer portal philosophy is that they kind of want to like supplement. They don't want to like be a program that, like, I mean, Colorado, for example, like they're never just going to like run their team on through the portal. I mean, they're a developmental program. They want a bunch of high school recruits, and if they're guys that can help and bodies that add depth, whatever, like they'll get it through the portal. So I don't think they're like looking far and wide right now for players, but maybe a couple positions here and there to add depth certainly could happen here in this window.
What would you say the main strength of this 2024 team is?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, in a weird way, I think it will end up being offensive centric and quarterback, at the end of the year. Like, I just think Tucker Gleason will play well, and he's a great leader. He's, as I mentioned, done some really good things in tight spots. And I think they have great leadership on this team this season. I mean, that doesn't necessarily always translate into wins, but I think their leaders are also great players, and they're some of the hardest working players. And I just think that culture kind of just permeates, through the locker room and everything. I mean, all these guys have been on really good teams these last couple of years. I mean, they won the MAC a few years ago. They got to the MAC title game last year. They won 11 consecutive games last year. So I just think all that kind of just builds on itself. And when you're around winning programs and you kind of see what it takes, I just think it kind of continues, and it's kind of a domino effect. So I think, quarterback, offense leadership will be the story.
When it comes to recruitment, now you've got to do not only your new players that coming in, but you got to do retention of existing players, which is another wrinkle into recruiting. How has the NIL and transfer portal impacted Toledo?
Yeah, it's a good one. I mean, it definitely is fascinating how you just have to keep re-recruiting your current players. I mean, I personally don't feel sorry for these coaches that their job is more difficult. I mean, they're paid really well. Like they coach college football. Like, this is all just kind of an entertainment product and fun and games. Like if you have to be a coach and you want it to be, then just go be like a high school teacher and coach high school football. But I mean, every industry changes. I mean, that's just kind of how it works. And now theirs is changing. That said, I understand the frustration. I mean, it's not fun when you have to deal with the influence of money, which never was really a part of it before. Certainly at places like Toledo, maybe, the big time programs, there's a little money under the table. But I mean, I think Jason Candle does a great job of kind of balancing everything. I mean, he's a good fundraiser. I mean, he's been here long enough. He knows everyone in town, and he wins enough that, people want to be a part of the program. So, I mean, I think he's done a good job kind of in this new era. I mean, NIL isn't like a massive, massive part of Toledo. But I mean, there's obviously players that have deals and have good deals. But I think the biggest thing that's impacted these types of programs is like you lose your really good players sometime. I mean, Penny Boone, DeQuan Finn. I mean, you lose your best offensive lineman to Texas Tech. So, I mean, that's kind of the part where they see. But then they're able to supplement as well. I mean, you get, a Florida transfer who, comes down, or you get a Youngstown State guy who goes up, but, maybe he can't go all the way up to like an Ohio State, but he comes to a Toledo. So I don't know. It kind of all evens itself out. I mean, I understand both sides of the argument. At the end of the day, I don't really think the sky is falling, though.
You kind of alluded to this just now. The head coach has so many responsibilities nowadays, and it seems like the role is really turning even more so into a general manager than a head coach, between recruiting, player retention, fundraising, and might be a little bit less about the X's and O's. Is Toledo doing anything like staff wise to maybe kind of kind of take some of those responsibilities off of Kendall, or is he kind of doing them all on his own?
Yeah, I mean, they just can't necessarily afford to do that. Some of the things you'll see the bigger programs do. But I mean, I would say he's kind of does it all. But there's no doubt that that's the thing I think that's frustrated people the most, and why you see head coaches become assistants or leave for the NFL. I mean, they love coaching. Like, all these coaches are coaches, at their core. And it just feels like it's less about coaching now than it's ever been. And I think that's like the biggest sticking point for coaches right now in college.
So given all the recent success Toledo's had and the personnel losses here from 2023, dust settles, 2024 is over. How do you think, or what do you think success looks like for Toledo in 2024?
Yeah, I mean, I tend to say another appearance in the MAC title game. This will be the first season of no divisions in the MAC, so it'll be interesting to kind of see that play out. I mean, I hate like putting a record on it, because it's just like, well, it kind of depends who the 9 wins are against, or who the 3 losses are to. But like, I mean, I think like a 9-3 record would be a success. I think Toledo should be happy with that. But I mean, this is a program that has really high expectations. I mean, I always tell people, I mean, I've been surprised since I've covered it, just kind of the expectations and the culture around Toledo. Like, it's not like Alabama or Ohio State or Michigan, but like it is still I mean, like, there's a Toledo message board that's very critical, and they have high expectations. Like, it's not unlike these big programs, and you see it on social media after they lose. Like, they kind of go into meltdown mode, just like a big program does after they lose. So, I mean, this is a proud place that wants to win. So, I mean, if anything short of 9 wins or an appearance in the MAC title game, like, people will definitely be upset.
Well, we've kind of covered a lot today. Is there anything else you want to share with us about this 2024 Toledo team?
Yeah, I mean, I'm excited for the season. I think the schedule, the non-conference schedule, it breaks well. I mean, Western Kentucky is a great program. I think that's an underrated G5 game. I'm really looking forward to that game. They play at Mississippi State, which, maybe you're catching them at the right time. They weren't very good last year. They have a new head coach this year. I think it's a third game of the season. So, things still won't totally be in order for Mississippi State. So, maybe you can grab a win there. I mean, Toledo obviously has a history of winning some big games in the past. So I think it'll be another exciting year, and will be fun to see what happens in the MAC.
Well, Kyle, we want to thank you for sharing your knowledge and your time with us today.
Absolutely. I mean, this is really fun. I mean, I love doing this kind of stuff, love talking football. So anytime you need anything, please hit me up.
We definitely will.
You got it.
If you're watching on YouTube, please hit that like and subscribe button. And if you're listening in podcast form, please rate and review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. We love those 5-star reviews. And once again, we thank everyone for all their support. And until the next time, we are the G5 Hive.